Gerry Ryan, the Ryan Line on 2FM, Ireland's #1.
They have one more food parcel left. They are on the cusp of history. And they are shattered after hauling 80 kilograms right across the Antarctic in sub-zero temperatures. No huskies, the sleds are pulled by humans. They are emulating the extraordinary adventure of Ernest Shackleton and going beyond. His father once said to him, "Son, you're a dreamer, so dream and dream big." Well, he certainly has, as today Pat Falvey and his band of Antarctic explorers are within sight, literally, of Amundsen Station at the South Pole. He now joins us on the line. Pat, good morning and a Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you too, Gerry, and what a Happy New Year for us. We're actually, as you said, just within sight, 22 kilometres now away of actually achieving our dream. That big dream that you said, that my father said, dream and dream big, but remember, listen, the following of the dream is where the success has lied. And it has. We've had such a great time, in getting here, outside the fact of the pain and the hardship that has taken for the last 1,120 kilometres as we dragged our sleds across the Antarctic.
Let us remind the listeners of that once again this morning. 1,000 odd kilometres. No huskies, no electronic pulling devices, no petrol-driven sleds, human endeavour alone.
That's it, and we decided to do it that way on the basis that we wanted to put our bodies and our minds to the test, and actually, as the great adventure of Ernest Shackleton, the endurance, which actually was their family motto, is only by endurance that we conquer. And we have put that to the test, and the whole team have actually gone beyond their own endurance, and now their goal, their success, their podium is now just ahead of us. And hopefully, and I say, right, okay, because you can never take anything for granted because we're exhausted, we're tired, suffering from injuries. Hopefully, we will be there later tonight. And as I speak to you now, we're actually getting ready to go. In about 5 minutes' time, the tents will drop for the last time on this great Antarctic continent. And our next stop will be the first site of civilized people of any source or anything, any building that we will have seen in 58 days.
Now, we are also mindful that you're not on your own. You're with Sean Menzies and Jonathan Bradshaw, and also, of course, and she puts herself into the history books hopefully later on today, Dr. Claire O'Leary, already a veteran of Everest in 2004. She will become the first Irish woman to reach the South Pole. Last time I spoke to you, your back was at you. You were in ribbons. The others were having to carry some of your weight for you, if not all of it. How is your health now, Pat, and how are the rest of them?
Well, it took 5 days for that to recover, and it was just phenomenal the way the team pulled together to actually put that into a situation.
There's the old the satellite clicking in and out. I'd say we might just have lost him there. Of course, I've had the pleasure of meeting the Shackleton family on occasion. I think the last time I met them was at a weekend party in Castle Leslie with the Leslie family. They're friends of theirs, and they just radiate exploration. They turn up looking like they're ready for the Antarctic. So I would say this morning is quite an interesting day for them, as well as they think about the endeavours of their great ancestor Ernest Shackleton. And, of course, the emulation of that effort today by Pat Falvey. And he's quite correct to say, even though he can see it, even though they're within sight of it, even though today they dropped camp for the last time on the great continent of the Antarctic, that, it's not over until that fat lady sings, until you're actually there. And, of course, when they get there to the Amundsen Station, what awaits them? Well, comfort of sorts. We'll find out more now as we re-establish our link with Pat Falvey on Antarctica. Pat, you back?
I'm back. I don't know where I was cut, Gerry, because the thing just went clean off, and I just got a phone call back. Okay.
Now, Pat, 22 kilometres. Describe what awaits you at Amundsen Station. It's not the Four Seasons Hotel.
No, like when we get to Amundsen Base, there's just a campsite that we will have. A lot of the times they don't like actually explorers actually turning up there, even though they've become more used to it in recent times and have become more civilized. But about 5 years ago, they had a sign up because, when actually the scientists and things like that see people like us coming, they feel kind of sorry, and they were coming out and feeding, it's like feeding the birds. And the general of the station at the time put up a big sign, a huge sign, said, please, don't feed the explorers. So we don't know what's to be expected in relation to that, but I'm sure we will get a good welcome, and I'm sure there's some Irish connections there somewhere at Amundsen Base. And when we get there, we will know, and I'll really inform you about what it feels like. The excitement at the moment is undescribable in our own minds and bodies.
As you look around you, can you describe for the audience what you see at this moment, Pat?
What we see at this moment is all around us 2,000 kilometres in circumference of ice. The fifth biggest continent in the world that nothing lives on. Not a lichen, not a tree, not a building other than the station's scientists. No human inhabitation indigenous to the area other than the fact of the scientists that operate on this amazing continent in research of, I don't know what they're doing, whether they're doing, tests for nuclear explosions or anything like that. But the Antarctic Treaty and people like us coming here will ensure it stays clean. The distance, 22 kilometres away, we can see a dot. That's it, a dot.
And that's Amundsen Station.
Dot. And we believe it's Amundsen Station. And actually one of the most amazing things, Gerry, about having navigated the team and I to this point for 1,140 kilometres is you're wondering, is that it? Are we on target? Are we going to hit it? And, the only site now of significance that we have seen in that 1,140 kilometres is this black dot. And tomorrow, or later this evening, we will reach it. And I will be able to let you know, how ecstatic the feelings that we will have as we actually endeavour to achieve our goal. There's one great story, Gerry, about team and about teamwork. And I think this actually signifies the attempt of the team and I as we actually strove for the pole. 1968 Special Olympics, I think it was. There was 8 Special Olympians at the starting line of a 100-metre dash. The gun went off and they were all rushing for goal to the line. And as they rushed for goal to the line, one little girl fell. And when she fell, the rest were actually caring for the line. One person spotted it, stopped. The other 6 stopped. They all came back. They helped up that little girl, and they actually linked arms. The whole stadium actually stood in the floor and wondered, and the whole 8 came across the winning line together. Well, that is what it's going to be like today, as we cross our winning line to where Shackleton had actually dreamed about standing, to where Scott and Amundsen had stood. And we will see, what it is that is there. We will be able to relate to you the feelings that we will have as we stand in a place that has been the creations of hundreds of millions of years of the creation of this earth. And we will stand in that point and hopefully collect our gold medal this evening. And all it will be is pictures and memories, because that's all an explorer actually carries with him. And that's what we see at the moment. That's how we feel. And as I say this to you, my team are now packing their sleds, awaiting me to go and actually claim that victory as Irish people.
Well, drive on, Pat. Tomorrow I hope to talk to you, rested, full of cocoa or Bovril or whatever it is you're taking. And we wish you an enjoyable and exciting final leg on this historic journey. God bless you and Godspeed.
Can I just say, as we approach this, I'm so proud, so proud to be an Irishman approaching the pole. Thank you very much.
19 to 92. The Gerry Ryan Show, Monday to Friday, 9 till 12 on 2FM.
The chief executioner and torturer of Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge regime is the first man awaiting trial over the death of at least 1.7 million people in Cambodia's infamous killing fields. More than 28 years after the killing stopped, Comrade Doik stands accused of killing at least 14,000 men while he ran the country's most efficient and ruthless torture house, a prison instrumental in the regime's Year Zero, or Anka, genocide campaign. Doik disappeared for 20 years after the regime collapsed, but was tracked down by Irish journalist Nick Dunlop in a refugee camp in 1999. He was handed over subsequently to the UN-assisted tribunal last July. Nick, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Gerry. Hi.
Who is this man?
Well, Comrade Doik was Pol Pot's, if you like, chief executioner. He was responsible for the prison apparatus that was centered in the prison in Phnom Penh called S21. And he oversaw the internal mechanics of the Khmer Rouge mass murder or genocide. And he was responsible for rooting out enemies from within the party itself. So he was a leading figure in the Khmer Rouge regime.
Can we give some background to what fueled this ideology? I mean, if we look at the ethnic cleansing of the Balkan Wars, or even going back to the Nazi concentration camps, it was it was a level of paranoia in relation to the Jews and other small ethnic groups, but also it was a good diversion. Blame the Jews and you may not notice some of the other terrible things that are happening to you from your own government's point of view. What exactly was behind the thinking in Cambodia? This idea to bring everything back to the Year Zero and kill everybody, including your mum and dad?
Well, the Khmer Rouge were inspired largely by Maoist China at the time of the Cultural Revolution. They began to form. So towards in the beginning, the middle 60s and towards the end of the 60s. They were inspired largely by Maoist doctrine, particularly the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And what they wanted to do was to turn what had occurred in China into a kind of they wanted to almost go one step further than the Chinese and produce a pure agrarian revolution in which there was no middle classes and simply just a peasant class. So the quickest way that they saw of being able to of achieving that goal was to root out what they perceived as the enemies of the state, and they set up a secret apparatus which spread throughout the country, where they would basically what they saw as cleansing Cambodian society from all the ills of modernity, of capitalism, the intellectual elite, any professional classes, doctors, teachers, etc. The irony being that many of the Khmer Rouge leadership, including Doik, were part of that elite to begin with. So in a sense, you could look at it as being one sort of giant leap forward and a kind of a revenge on the middle classes, of which there were very few. But that's where the revolution spiraled completely out of control, and they began to eat within the ranks of their own ranks.
And literally they turned upon themselves.
Exactly. It began. They were extremely secretive, and they became so paranoid that even within their own ranks, they began to see enemies everywhere. And even Doik, it's probably likely that had the regime continued without the intervention of the Vietnamese in '79, that Doik himself would have ended up on an execution list and would have been purged as well.
Now, this man was ruthlessly efficient. As head of the special branch, he was personally responsible for the extermination of 20,000 at least women and children, a huge number of men. He seems to have been the principal link between the Khmer Rouge strategy and indeed the mechanics or the machinery of mass murder or ethnic cleansing. These people are sometimes political opportunists. Frequently, though, they also have to be pathologically insane to be able to do this. What was his personality like?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, when I met him in 1999, I mean, we had, several hours of talking and, this extraordinary confession. But the thing about it is that I think that when you look at, regimes such as democratic countries as the Khmer Rouge, in other parts of the world, and you compare various notes of the kind of personalities that drove them. I mean, for Duik, I think he was very much, from subsequent research, I've realized that he is something akin to sort of tempered metal beforehand. So he was perfectly placed to carry out this kind of work for the regime. But I think he probably saw his role as being something like a nasty and dirty job in the sort of in a great revolution that he had to do in order to purify and make this regime work, or this revolution work in the way that the Khmer Rouge envisaged. That he was kind of the man who was tasked with doing the unpleasant but necessary task of purifying and cleansing the society. So I think he was very driven by the ideology, but saw no middle ground, as in, as soon as you were arrested, you were guilty. That's it. There's no question of innocence at all. So, and those people who were arrested had to be killed, and that included family members as well. So, for example, if one cadre was arrested and named as being a traitor, then the rest of his family would be brought in, and they too would be executed, and that included children.
When you spoke to him, did you get any sense that he differentiated between those who were arrested, instantly found guilty and disposed of, in the most horrific ways, by the way? Did he differentiate between them and any other members in society? I mean, were they less than human to him? Is that how he coped with this?
I think that one of the things I've tried to do in the course of researching my book on him was to try and understand something of what drives somebody like that to do what they did. And I think that one of the things you do is that you basically reduce people to good people and bad people, that the world is of great simplicity between those who are with you and those who are against us. And I think we've heard this elsewhere. Yeah. And he saw it as being absolutely right that we carry out the revolution in this way. And he made no connection. Had he made that connection, I don't think he would have been able to continue to do it himself. So it's very important that you dehumanize your prisoners. You dehumanize them, and you reduce them to being total enemies, people who aren't even human. And that enables you to carry out this kind of horrific work. So I think subsequently, at least from what he said, he believed that many of the people were innocent, and he felt great remorse for doing so. But, the question remains, is that remorse genuine? And I really don't have an answer for that. He's the only Khmer Rouge who's ever actually expressed any kind of remorse. So I think that we have to take that as meaning something, although exactly what I'm not at liberty to say what.
Did he say that he now felt that some of them were innocent, or that he knew at the time some of them were innocent? They are but the detritus of my business. I couldn't help it. Obviously, some good fellas were going to get chopped up with the bad fellas.
Right. I think that, when he talked about it, he said he expressed remorse very much in terms of towards the end of the revolution, when people that he knew personally arrived at the gates of his prison and had to be taken and executed. So it was very, it was very telling in terms of, he never regretted the idea that you arrest people and you have them killed. But towards the end, he wondered whether the party itself, who had sent people to his prison, whether the people were in fact guilty. And obviously, when you're talking to somebody several years or decades after the event, it's easy to express that kind of remorse. So there are still huge questions as to what he actually meant and whether, he was genuinely. In a way, though,
isn't that a bit like the commandant of Auschwitz saying, I'm not sure that everybody that was sent to the camp should have been sent there?
Well, of course it is. You've got to look at everything within its context, and that's what I try to do, is to go back to the time of when he joined the Khmer Rouge, when he became politically active, which was, for those of you who, listeners might remember, during the Cold War, 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, Southeast Asia was in the midst of huge conflict over, basically right and left. And, when you look at it in those sort of contexts, perhaps it made some sort of sense, and that's what I've tried to bring forward in the story. Yes, of course. One can be cynical, but there's too much in his confession of what he said to me and my colleague Nate Thayer that really, you can't, simply discard and say, well, there's just cynical opportunism. Yes, there's an element of that, but certainly how much, I can't tell you. But I think it's so compelling that somebody, particularly in this culture, as I've spent a lot of time in Cambodia, to admit that you are wrong is an extraordinary thing, and it doesn't happen, and no other Khmer Rouge has expressed that degree of remorse.
Can you describe to us how you found him?
Yeah, sure. I was actually on assignment for a mine clearance agency, and I had a day off, in fact. And the workers who were working for this mine clearance organization, clearing mines in this area, just after the end of the war in Cambodia, they had a meeting with Khmer Rouge leaders in a district that I'd always wanted to go to, but had never managed to because it was off limits, obviously, because of the war. I had a day off, so I decided to accompany them. They had a meeting with the Khmer Rouge leaders, so we drove down for about 5 hours through the scrub jungle and into this zone, this area. And whilst they were having their meetings with the Khmer Rouge to ascertain exactly what kind of ordnance and leftover landmines were in the area and where they needed to begin work so that people could actually begin to farm and live in this area, I was just wandering around, and this man in a white walked up to me wearing a white T-shirt with the initials ARC, American Refugee Committee. And he introduced himself with a different name. But immediately, I've been carrying around his photograph for some time. Immediately, I recognized him as the man in the photograph, as Doik. But of course, I didn't know the situation at the time. I was there as a guest, if you like, and I thought, well, I've got to take this, steadily, because as far as I knew at that point, I didn't know whether he was still head of the Khmer Rouge secret police. So that I had to think about all these things and plan ahead. So I managed to take a photograph of him. I asked him a few sort of innocent questions and said I would see him soon. And a few weeks later, I came back again, filmed him, returned again, subsequently, I think, a third or fourth time with Nate Thayer, and we began to question him about the problems that he was facing and the people were facing in that area. And then Nate, in fact, asked him outright, said, I believe you're the head of the Khmer Rouge Special Branch, and he deflected. He said something, no, I was, organizing children's education books for the Ministry of Education, blah, blah, blah.
Huh.
After the third time, I think he said, yes, it's true. He began this extraordinary confession where he said, yes, I know who you are, and that I know that you know who I am. So he began to talk about his role as Pol Pot's chief executioner, and the rest is pretty much history.
And how did he describe himself? Can you talk us through that?
He saw himself, he's now a born-again Christian.
That's convenient.
It's convenient, yes. You can be cynical about that too, but again, like I say to you, maybe it's something to in Buddhism in Cambodia, there is no way of getting out of the laws of karma, cause and effect, which means that basically you can't go to confession and say, look, I've done all these terrible things, say 3 Hail Marys and you're off. In Cambodia, you're stuck. But in the kind of Christianity that he converted to, it enabled him to, I believe, face his past and say, yes, what I did in those days as a young man, as a believer in communism, that it was wrong, and I feel very bad about that. And those essentially, that's what he said. And again, like I say, you have to put that against the backdrop of maybe as many as 20, perhaps 40,000 people we just don't know who died at his hands. So I think, perhaps if he hadn't converted to Christianity, he would never have admitted his guilt. We just don't know.
Yes, it's possible that that conversion and indeed his subsequent confession and rebirth as a Christian, enabled him to sort of read. A lot of people use that. It's a technique to reinvent yourself, and it gives you the moral ability to continue living. And I suppose from a human point of view, you have to understand that. What many of these people do is that they, in their reinvention of themselves, they also sanitize their role in the killing. And while he may have been the one whose name appeared on the warrants for arrests or for the killing execution orders, of course he didn't really know what happened, or he wasn't directly involved in the horrific tortures. And some of the techniques and the methods involved were barbaric. All death is awful when it's illegal, but these guys managed to reinvent the wheel when it came to torture and death. Did he understand? Did he have an appreciation of what these people went through after they entered the prison?
I don't know. Again, I have to say that I think that part of a survival technique in a situation like that, you have to look at it as in terms of the context in which he operated. It was a terrifying regime by all accounts, and he knew that had he not carried out his orders, he too would have been killed, and that's true. But again, I would say that, when you look at his confession, when you heard what he had to say or read what he had to say, there's just too much in it to really discount it as being, he's just using it as a convenient scapegoat. He didn't shirk his responsibility, and he was involved directly in torture for sure, and almost certainly in killing. Nobody wants to admit to doing things. We've all done things in our past, particularly when we're young, which we, certainly regret, and we would find difficulty admitting to the truth of it. And I think that's no different. Just the gravity of the crime is so, horrendous that it's, our mind naturally balks to it. But again, you have to try and place yourself within the kind of context in which the Khmer Rouge operated. I mean, a paranoid, terrifying regime where the slightest mistake or innuendo or comment or rumor could mean death. And this is something that all Khmer Rouge faced at the time, as well as the victims, of course. That isn't to abscond him from any responsibility, far from it, but it is, by way of an explanation. And if we can understand these people, then I think we're coming closer to maybe preventing it from occurring a second time.
At the risk of being prurient, and it's almost impossible to avoid being so when you're dealing with this kind of a story, can you, particularly for younger listeners this morning, give an indication of the kind of things that were done to these people, leading to their death and their deaths eventually? Because when I used the description, they reinvented the wheel when it came to torture and death, and they were barbaric in the extreme. They were.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's very important to remember exactly what these people did. I mean, I may sound almost, favourable towards Duch. I mean, the thing is that he ran an institution with institutionalized brutality as a daily occurrence, where he instituted and organized tortures that are difficult for us to understand. For example, the pulling out of toenails, dunking in water, beatings, until they're unconscious. There's many cases where children were dropped from the balconies of the prison onto the ground below. Rape was a problem which Duch tried to curb. And many of the Khmer Rouge guards themselves, when they were found guilty of rape, they too were executed. They drained people for their blood. Prisoners that had finished their confessions. This institution was set up to basically get confessions from prisoners. Once those confessions had been extracted under torture, many people had their bodies drained of blood and killed in that way, so the blood could be used for soldiers in the front line. This kind of thing was a daily occurrence, and many of the people were killed in shallow graves within the perimeters of the prison, but also outside of Phnom Penh in a place called Chung Eg, which many people who've been traveling to Cambodia, they would have visited. So it was a place dedicated to brutality. I mean, it's very difficult for us now sitting here to try and imagine anything approaching that. But, these things occur. They continue to occur throughout, the world at the moment, particularly with special rendition and in various parts of the globe, and then all sorts of other kinds of, psychological torture. One thing that Duch was very proud of when we spoke to him was the fact that he used psychological trickery to extract the confession, saying that you would be released if you confessed all, and the organization, meaning the party, would allow you to go home to your family. It was a complete lie, but he, was quite pleased at his cunning, and but everybody who entered that prison was taken out to be killed.
Also, they succeeded in completely dismantling the social structure right into the heart of the family, which would have been cherished in Buddhist culture in Cambodia. They managed to create a scenario where children no longer, trusted their parents, and vice versa, where children would, in fact, report their parents for real or imagined transgressions against the Khmer Rouge.
That's right, yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that they tried to do, was to dismember the kind of family unit, if you like. But like I say to you, when the Khmer Rouge arrested somebody, the entire family would be arrested and taken away. Not always, but generally speaking, that was very often the case. So they had a saying that basically, in order for the new grass to grow, they had to pull out the old, which meant basically killing relatives, both, entire families in some cases, because one family member was deemed to be, a traitor to the revolution.
Did he, at this stage, from a practical point of view, accept that the party the Khmer Rouge's interpretation of what Mao's plan was in the Cultural Revolution for the Chinese, that their interpretation of it was absolute bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think these people really believed that what they were doing was right. They had a kind of, if you can understand, if this makes any sense at all, I mean, they had a moral framework. They believed that what they were doing, like I say, was, they were almost in competition with the Cultural Revolution. They wanted to produce a pure agrarian revolution within a matter of, years, as opposed to, having a sequence stage of socialism before arriving at a communist state. I think they believed completely in what they were doing. They felt that this was the only way to do it. That in order to purify your country, you had to pull out the weeds, and this is where it all went horribly wrong. They were deeply secretive, and it went, extremely paranoid. And by the end, I mean, lots and lots of people had been, apprehended to cause people like Doik, at least what he says anyway, to question whether this was really the right way forward. I mean, the thing is that had the Khmer Rouge continued, one wonders who else would be left to make a revolution. In fact, that's a direct quote from somebody who was taken to the prison and killed. Who would be left to make a revolution if we continue to kill everyone?
Well, it would have eventually come down to Pol Pot with the gun to his own head, I presume. But of course, naturally...
Well, it almost did. In 1997, he was put under house arrest, and then he died, So, yeah, I mean, it never stopped, in a sense. I mean, the widespread killing that you saw in the 70s, ebbed and slowed down in the 1980s almost to next to nothing by comparison. But the killings were still continued. People were still disappearing in the middle of the night, and people are still being executed.
Now, it's interesting to examine a society in the wake of this kind of thing. We saw after the Second World War that necessity became the mother of invention. Nazis, there was no point in cleansing Nazis out of every section of society, because there were so many Nazis that were necessary to run the infrastructure of German society that you couldn't have gotten the country back up and running if anybody who'd had any connection with the Nazi party was to be excluded. So only really bad Nazis were excluded. And even at that, some really bad Nazis just went back into Siemens and places like that and became directors like they were just before the war. And that still, I think, probably is a difficult thing for a lot of people to understand. But it was a practical necessity. In Cambodia, something similar happened as well, but I don't know whether it was a practical necessity. A lot of the Khmer Rouge, including this man, seemed to continue living. They may have changed their geographical, home, but they continued to live, and some quite well, with influential positions in Cambodian society.
Yeah, that's true.
And was it necessary?
I think what happened, that the war in Cambodia started in 1970, perhaps a little bit earlier, and it continued right until 1999. So it's a very long time for a country to be at war, particularly a civil war, which is particularly vicious. Now, what was the reason that the Khmer Rouge imploded? Well, there were several reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they were on the wane. I mean, they no longer had the influence they used to have, and they were relegated to the jungles of the frontiers. And the Prime Minister, who's currently Prime Minister still, Hun Sen, did a deal. He said, we're basically going to exchange justice for peace. And that's what happened. And a number of Khmer Rouge were, leaders, were allowed to continue their lives in the west of the country, unmolested, pretty much under their own protection, in exchange for a cessation to hostilities, which was draining resources for everybody, including, obviously human lives. And, that was the expedient and the most practical thing to do at the time. The UN didn't bring in men to the war, but the Cambodian government, led by Hun Sen, did. But what that's meant is that there's a huge problem with impunity in Cambodia, and that goes for the lowliest of criminals to, the Khmer Rouge henchmen themselves. So this tribunal is seen to be, hopefully, to bring some sort of an end to this culture of what they call a culture of impunity. But yeah, I mean, there are literally thousands of Khmer Rouge still alive, people who have participated in mass atrocities. There just simply isn't the political will nor the wherewithal to be able to bring all of those people to account, unlike in, say, Rwanda, where they're talking about 70,000 trials, local trials.
But with a huge international support mechanism in there to bring these people to trial, that doesn't seem to be in place in Cambodia.
No, not in the same way. And also, you have to remember, as you do, that what occurred in Cambodia happened nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, there's an awful lot of things have changed in the meantime.
You're making me
But there
feel
has to be
old,
some
Nick.
way of yeah, it does indeed. But it's something. It's agreed that something has to be done. So it just remains to be seen how effective this tribunal will actually be.
On the line, we have Nick Dunlop, who has been investigating and indeed writing about Comrade Doig, standing accused of killing at least, anywhere in the region between 20 and 40,000 people while he ran the country's most efficient and ruthless torture house and prison in Cambodia, enforcing the Khmer Rouge's Year Zero genocide campaign. Nick, you're still with us. Ronan Keating, a name you may be familiar with, is also on the line. Nick, Ronan the singer, who visited Cambodia just before Christmas and in fact played there. Ronan, good morning.
Morning, Gerry. How are you?
Very well. Happy New Year to you. You've been listening. You were listening.
I was listening to the radio. I'm driving along, and I just thought I'd share some of what I witnessed while I was there. I went to some of the genocide museums myself, and it was just shocking. It was mind blowing. We knew so much, but to actually go there and see what these people went through, what the Khmer Rouge did to these people, it was horrendous. Some of my band travelled up to the killing fields also, and some of the stories they brought back. I couldn't go up there. I found it hard. It was it's just an incredible situation what happened there, and to hear that Pol Pot died a couple of years ago, almost a free man, living up in the mountains, I believe, with his family and so on, under house arrest. I understand, but it was horrendous.
Let me ask you this, Ronan, because Nick, of course, has been very deep in country, I suppose is the best way of describing it, for a long time on this search, and has had this unique opportunity to actually interview and meet and challenge Doig face to face. For you as a visitor to the country, looking at the museums, hearing the stories of what happened 30 years ago, no doubt being shocked and traumatised by that experience, how did you find relating to the rest of the people?
Well, the people are incredibly warm. I mean, I guess they have this sense of moving on. They just want to keep, they've got to move on from what happened, their past, and move forward. And, you can't forever live in that sort of time, I guess. We had this incredible welcome when we arrived. They actually didn't believe I was coming to the country because there'd never been an international...
Hello?
Hello?
Yep, there you go. As fate would have it. He was cut off there. Nick, yes, I suppose there is a tendency for us living in the comfort of the West to sort of want the entire country to be held accountable and for them to be, wearing sackcloth and ashes. But of course, the practicality of it is they have ordinary lives and families to bring up, and they probably do want, as Ronan described there, they probably do want to leave this behind them.
Oh, I think they want to leave it behind, but as to whether they actually can, I think it's very difficult. A friend of mine just recently... came back from Cambodia, and he was doing some interviews. He works for a French newspaper, Libération, and he was talking to a survivor of one of many prisons throughout the countryside, and she was describing her story to him and her experiences at this particular Khmer Rouge prison, and she survived. And a couple of men appeared, and were listening in on the conversation. This happens very often in Cambodia. Anyway, one of the men interjected and said, "Well, the Khmer Rouge didn't. I was a soldier in this area during that time, and not everything that you say is actually true. We weren't, as horrible as you make out." And she began to backtrack on her story, and she was actually very, very fearful, and began to say, "Well, actually, the Khmer Rouge weren't as brutal as I made out. They were actually very kind." So when you hear stories like that, you realize that actually this is not something that has finished 30 odd years ago. This is something that is very relevant to today, and it's very much in the villages of Cambodia, which constitutes the majority of Cambodian people, and they are living with us. They are living alongside the killers in many cases. It would be interesting to follow up on that woman and see if she's okay. But, this is a very different world to the world that you and I are used to, Gerry. I mean, I grew up in the sort of safe seclusion of Dunleary. This is a far, far, cry from my experiences as a kid. And you realize that the world is a very different place outside of Europe, that, people operate in a very different, on a different level.
Well, it's accountability, I think. For instance, last night I was watching a superb documentary about the riots in the Bogside and the Bogside. The Battle of the Bogside, as it's referred to,
Sure.
and almost about the same time as these killings were happening, as a matter of fact, in Cambodia.
Right.
Now, of course, the difference in the Bogside was that the entire Western world was looking on, and even if you were a British soldier or a member of the RUC or a member of the IRA or a member of the UVF, you were accountable to a large degree to the international media and to your neighbours. It may not necessarily have stopped you, but there was a lingering feeling, I think, with everybody that, I'm going to be on television, I'm going to end up being asked questions about this someday. And of course, that naturally enough, that turned out to be exactly the case. There was no sense of that. All we really knew from our school desks here in Ireland was that occasionally the Americans bombed Cambodia, a lot more so than really we realised probably at the time, and that it was kind of near Vietnam. And were they the same as the Vietnamese? I don't know really. Phnom Penh was the capital. That was all we knew about it.
Sure.
And is there much more of a spotlight other than somebody like you coming along and raising this issue?
Well, I think the thing that I found is that I have far more in common with Cambodia and Cambodians and this part of the world than I ever thought, that I ever dreamed was possible. I mean, I'm happy to say, or proud to say, that one of my friends in Cambodia was a former Khmer Rouge himself, and I've caught him on occasion, talking about this kind of business as though it was not such a bad thing after all. But I mean, it's you can. When you try and sort of understand, I mean, this is what I tried to do in the course of my book, excuse me for mentioning it, but the whole thing about how culture, how all these other external factors are important, of course, but also culture plays a part in it. Society, belief, Buddhism plays a role, etc. All of these, and the way that the society is constructed, and it's not that difficult to understand. And a lot of the people, I mean, if you're given the impossible decision of, like, you've got to kill this person, if you don't, we'll kill your family and we'll kill you, what kind of a choice is that? And that's not a choice that either you or myself has ever had to face.
No. And we always...
And I'm always very aware of the fact that I'm an outsider in all of this, I mean, I think... But again, like I said, I mean, Ronan was saying they're very, very, warm, friendly people, and they are. I mean, they're incredibly accommodating and pleasant to be around. But then there's this other side to Cambodian society. But it isn't that different. And I think it's, to see sort of people get brutalized and in turn brutalize other people. It's not so difficult to understand when you've seen it up close.
Ronan's back on the line, actually. Ronan, when you played there, you say you were greeted very warmly. They were quite shocked and surprised that a Western pop star had come to play for them. How did you find the people beyond that, though?
Well, I mean, I went to the Russian market and a few places myself, just shopping and, sightseeing generally. And it was just amazing. I mean, there was a lovely, a great warmth from the people, genuinely. I mean, they obviously don't get a huge amount of Westerners through there. You can sense that. You can feel that. I mean, I stuck out like a sore thumb, when you go to the markets and so on. So, I felt very comfortable there, though. I mean, I didn't feel threatened in any way. But when you go to these museums, I mean, it's heartbreaking. I'm not by no means an authority on it, Gerry.
But did you bring up the subject? I mean, the inevitable, temptation in these sort of situations is after a few drinks and you're maybe with some local people, you go, particularly if you're Irish, you'll say, well, did you fellas know what was happening down the road?
Yeah, well, I mean, you skim the surface, I didn't get too deep. I mean, I spoke about going to the museums, and in interviews, I did a press conference as well, and, they do ask you, and I went to the museum, so I wanted to learn a little bit so that I knew what I was kind of talking about. I'm by no means an authority, and I'd like to know more, and I'll definitely get Nick's book and read up more on it. But yeah, you do bring it up and you talk about it, but like people do when they come to Ireland and ask about the troubles in the north, but you only skim the surface, really. You don't get too heavy, you don't get too involved.
Okay,
but I mean, it's very much everyone's aware of what happened. I mean, and you can sense that.
Thanks for talking to us, Ronan.
Thanks,
Take
Gerry.
care with your journey and a happy new year to you. Nick, where to for the Cambodians now?
Well, we've got the tribunal coming up. I don't know exactly what that's going to interpret. In fact, I'm working on a film project with Le Brockie Fraser, which is a Dublin-based company, to sort of raise the kind of questions that I think this tribunal will bring up. And it's difficult to see what impact it'll have, if any at all, to ordinary Cambodians, but we wait and see. And I'm definitely going to be in court when Doik has his moment in the dock to confess his crimes and see where that goes.
And what could happen to him?
It's difficult to say.
Even in Ireland, the tribunal can send you to jail. What can they do to him in Cambodia?
Sorry, say again. Sorry, Gerry.
In Ireland, we saw Liam Lawler going to jail. Admittedly, it wasn't for what he revealed in the tribunal, more as to what he didn't reveal. But what can the Tribunal of Inquiry in Cambodia do to Doik other than maybe tell this awful story? Will anything happen to him?
There are a couple of things that I think are important. Yes, I mean he will be locked away. I mean I don't think he'll see the outside of a cell ever. He will be in for the rest of his life. The overwhelming evidence against him is enormous. I think that what is important is that internationally this is recognized, that certain facts will be established beyond reasonable doubt, that in a court we will see arguments for and against both defense and prosecution, giving him a fair hearing, something which his regime never believed in, and this is unprecedented. So to see that occur, I think is going to be important, and it's going to be important to other people. Now, whether it's going to translate well to ordinary Cambodians, many of whom are illiterate, who have no idea about any sense of justice, have never known any sense of justice, see this man in court and confess to his crimes and be sentenced, potentially, it could be very, important for ordinary people, but it just depends on whether this is going to be made relevant to ordinary people, whether they really understand the process, whether they understand that Doik should have a defense despite the crimes that he's accused of. I mean, this is about due process. It's not about revenge, and revenge is everything the Khmer Rouge stood for.
Well, we shall wait and see. Thank you very much for talking to us, Nick Dunlop. Good morning.
Thanks, Gerry.
Well, that's it. I'll be back with you tomorrow, 9 a.m. on 2FM. Until then, take care of yourselves and be good out there.
Gerry Ryan, the Rhine.